Henry had everything people dream of: mansions, luxury cars, exclusive vacations, but none of it filled the void inside him. Every morning, he woke up in silk sheets, yet his heart felt colder than the marble floors of his penthouse. The world saw him as a man who had it all, yet deep down, he knew he was chasing an illusion. Real happiness, the kind that makes life worth living, had always slipped through his fingers like sand. He often wondered, was there more to life than wealth and power? Despite being surrounded by people, Henry felt utterly alone. His business partners respected him.
Hello, I'm the storyteller of the channel, and I would like to ask for a second of your time to subscribe, activate the notification bell, and like the video so that YouTube can take our story to more people who are passionate about stories like this. Thank you, and without further ado, let's continue with our story.
His employees feared him, and strangers envied him, but not a single soul truly cared for him. Conversations were empty, laughter was forced, and friendships were nothing more than transactional alliances. His success was undeniable, yet he couldn't remember the last time he felt genuinely happy. At night, he sat on his balcony, watching the city lights, asking himself if this was all life had to offer. Henry's parents had drilled one lesson into him from childhood: money is power, and power is everything. He had spent his entire life believing this, sacrificing love, friendships, and even his own emotions to build an empire. He had crushed competitors, signed ruthless deals, and secured his place among the wealthiest. But was it worth it? He could afford anything, yet not a single thing could buy the feeling of being truly seen, truly loved. It was a cruel irony, having the world at his feet, but feeling like he belonged nowhere. Loneliness had a strange way of creeping in, no matter how much noise surrounded him. He had thrown extravagant parties where hundreds of people attended, yet he always found himself slipping away, standing in the shadows, sipping expensive whiskey, wondering why none of it mattered. The more he tried to distract himself with luxury, the emptier he felt. Real emotions, real connections, he had traded them for bank statements and status. But deep down, he longed for something no amount of money could provide. One evening, as he walked down a bustling street, something unexpected caught his eye. Among the sea of people chasing their own lives, he noticed a small, humble candy stand. A woman stood behind it, her hands busy wrapping treats, her face glowing with a warmth he hadn't seen in years. Her laughter was genuine, her presence magnetic. People smiled around her, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. It was the kind of joy money couldn't manufacture. And just like that, Henry felt something stir inside him. A curiosity, a pull, a question he couldn't yet answer. The sight of her was unsettling in the best way possible. She had nothing he had, yet she possessed everything he lacked. It wasn't just her presence, it was the way she treated people, the way her kindness seemed to flow effortlessly. She wasn't trying to impress anyone, wasn't looking for validation, yet everyone around her felt lighter. Henry had spent his life in rooms filled with power, but here, standing before a simple candy seller, he realized he had never encountered something quite so powerful. For the first time in years, he felt an urge he couldn't ignore. He wanted to understand her. He wanted to know what made her different, why her happiness seemed unshakable. There was something about her that tugged at the edges of his carefully built world, making him question everything he thought he knew. And so, Henry found himself drawn to her, unaware that this moment would change the course of his life forever. Henry found himself returning to that same street, drawn by something he couldn't quite explain. He watched as Lily, the candy seller, greeted each customer with a warm smile, her voice carrying a kindness that felt almost foreign to him. She wasn't just selling sweets. She was brightening people's days, offering more than just sugar, but a moment of genuine human connection. It was effortless, pure, and completely opposite to the transactional relationships he had always known. He had spent his life dealing in power and profit, but here was someone who traded in something far more valuable: warmth. At first, he told himself it was just curiosity, but as he observed Lily, something inside him shifted. Unlike the people in his world, who flattered him out of self-interest, Lily had no agenda. She laughed with strangers, gave extra candy to kids who didn't have enough money, and even comforted a crying woman who had just lost her job. It was as if kindness wasn't something she chose. It was simply who she was. Henry had met people who wore kindness like a mask, but Lily? Hers was real, raw, and completely uncalculated. One afternoon, he finally gathered the courage to approach her. "How do you do it?" he asked, his voice carrying an edge of disbelief. Lily blinked, surprised by the question. "Do what?" she asked, handing a little boy a caramel candy for free. "Stay so happy," Henry muttered, almost embarrassed by his own words. Lily chuckled, shaking her head. "Happiness isn't about what you have. It's about what you give." Her words landed heavier on Henry than any business negotiation he had ever had. She spoke about life in a way that felt foreign to him. While he had spent his years chasing more success, more wealth, more control, Lily found joy in the simplest of things. She found fulfillment in giving rather than taking, in sharing rather than accumulating. She wasn't rich, at least not in the way Henry understood wealth, but she had something he had never possessed: peace. The kind of peace that comes from knowing you're exactly where you're meant to be. And for the first time, Henry felt something he couldn't ignore: envy. As days passed, he found himself returning to her stand, each time feeling a little less like the untouchable millionaire and more like a man searching for something real. Lily never treated him differently, never looked at him with the admiration or fear he was used to. She spoke to him like a friend, teased him when he tried to guess the flavors of her candies, and even made him laugh, something he hadn't done in years. He had built walls so high that no one could climb them, yet here she was slipping through the cracks without even trying. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, he watched Lily give her last few candies away to a homeless man. She smiled as she did it, as if the very act of giving brought her joy. Henry had donated millions to charities, but never once had he felt the kind of fulfillment that radiated from her at that moment. It made him question everything. Maybe happiness wasn't about having, it was about sharing. Maybe love wasn't about being admired, it was about being known. And maybe, just maybe, wealth wasn't measured in dollars, but in moments like these. That night, an idea took root in his mind. He wanted to understand Lily's kindness, to see if it was truly as unconditional as it seemed. But more than that, he wanted to know, if he had nothing to offer, would she still see him the same way? And so, a plan began to form, a test of generosity that would reveal more than he ever expected. Henry had spent his life surrounded by people who only saw him for his wealth. They smiled at him, laughed at his jokes, and catered to his every whim. But deep down, he knew it was all because of his money. He had learned long ago that trust was a fragile thing, easily bought and just as easily broken. But Lily was different. She had no idea who he was, no reason to impress him, and yet her kindness never wavered. He needed to know, was it real? Was she truly as selfless as she seemed? Disguising himself as a beggar, he stepped onto the familiar street, his usual confidence replaced by nervous anticipation. His expensive suit was gone, replaced by ragged clothes and dirt-streaked skin. His neatly combed hair was a tangled mess, and for the first time in his life, he felt invisible. People passed by without a second glance, some even crossing the street to avoid him. It was a humbling experience, a stark reminder of how differently the world treated those who had nothing. As he approached Lily's stand, she was busy helping an elderly woman count her change. Henry hesitated, then took a shaky breath. "Excuse me, miss," he said, his voice unrecognizably hoarse. "I haven't eaten all day. Could you spare something?" He expected hesitation, maybe even rejection. Instead, Lily looked at him with the same warmth she gave everyone else. Without a second thought, she reached into her basket and handed him 2 pieces of candy and a small sandwich. "Here," she said, smiling. "It's not much, but it's yours." He was stunned. She didn't ask what he could give in return, didn't question whether he was telling the truth. She simply gave. "Why?" he asked, genuinely curious. Lily shrugged, wiping her hands on her apron. Because I can, and because I'd want someone to do the same for me if I were in your shoes. Her words hit him harder than he expected. How could someone with so little be so willing to share? She had no wealth, no power. Yet in that moment, she was the richest person he had ever met. As he sat nearby, pretending to eat, he watched her continue working, her kindness never faltering. A child who couldn't afford candy? She gave it for free. A man who dropped his groceries? She helped him pick them up. She wasn't just kind when people were watching. She was kind because it was who she was. Henry had tested many people in his life, but never had anyone passed so effortlessly. This wasn't an act. Lily's generosity was as real as the air he breathed. For the first time, Henry felt something crack inside him, an unfamiliar warmth, a realization that money had never given him what Lily had so freely. He had spent years believing kindness was a transaction, something given in exchange for something else. But Lily? She proved that the greatest gifts were given with no expectation of return. And at that moment, he knew this test had been for himself just as much as it had been for her. But there was still so much he didn't know. What was her story? What made her this way? Why, in a world so cold, did she still choose to be warm? And so, Henry's curiosity deepened, leading him to uncover the hardships Lily carried, the struggles she endured that made her heart so unbreakable. Henry had assumed that people like Lily, those who carried the sun in their smiles, must have lived easy lives. But as he followed her from a distance, blending into the evening crowd, he saw the truth. After closing her candy stand, she walked with weary steps toward a run-down part of the city. The bright, cheerful woman who had given so freely now looked exhausted, her shoulders heavy with unseen burdens. It struck him, kindness wasn't a product of privilege. Sometimes it was born from pain. He watched as she entered a dimly lit bar, tying her apron before disappearing behind the counter. The realization hit him like a wave. She wasn't just a candy seller. She worked late shifts serving drinks, her hands moving tirelessly as she cleaned tables, took orders, and endured the crude remarks of drunken customers. She smiled through it all, but Henry could see the exhaustion behind her eyes. It wasn't just about making ends meet. There was something deeper driving her, something heavier than just survival. Curious, he found a seat in the corner and listened. As the night wore on, he overheard hushed conversations between Lily and an older woman, one of the other workers. "You should rest, Lily," the woman urged, her voice filled with concern. "You've been pushing yourself too hard." Lily only shook her head, forcing a tired smile. "I can't stop now. My mom's surgery is scheduled next month. I just need to hold on a little longer." Henry's chest tightened. This was why she worked so relentlessly. She wasn't just struggling for herself. She was fighting for someone she loved. She moved through the night, refilling drinks, wiping tables, taking insults from men who saw her as nothing more than someone to serve them. Yet, she never lost that light in her eyes, that resilience that refused to break. Henry had seen people crack under far less pressure, but Lily? She carried the weight of the world on her back, yet still found the strength to be kind. He had spent his life believing that money made people powerful, but Lily, with nothing but her determination, was the strongest person he had ever met. By the time her shift ended, the city was asleep, but Lily had no time to rest. She walked home alone, the streets eerily quiet, her steps slow and careful. Her apartment was small, the walls thin, but inside, the warmth she carried was reflected in the way she cared for her mother. Henry watched from a distance as she gently tucked the older woman in a bed, whispering reassurances that everything would be okay. It was then that he understood. Lily's kindness wasn't just a choice. It was a promise to herself, to her mother, to the world that had given her so little, yet couldn't take away her light. Henry had spent years chasing wealth, believing that success was measured in numbers. But Lily, with her empty pockets and tired hands, had something he never did: purpose. She wasn't waiting for a miracle. She was creating one with every sacrifice she made. And for the first time, Henry knew He couldn't just watch from the shadows. He had the power to change her life. But how could he do it without shattering the one thing that made her so special? A plan formed in his mind, but this time it wasn't a test. It wasn't about proving a point. It was about giving her what she had given to so many others, hope. But would she accept it? Would she let him in? Or had life taught her that kindness was only real when it came with no strings attached? Henry had never been the kind of man to second-guess himself. Yet here he was, standing outside Lily's candy stand, nerves tightening in his chest. He had the power to change her life with a single signature, a simple transfer of funds, but handing her a check felt wrong. Lily wasn't someone who needed rescuing. She wasn't waiting for a millionaire to sweep in and solve her problems. She was a fighter, a woman who had built her world with her own hands. And if he wanted to be a part of her life, he needed to approach her with more than just money. He needed to offer her something real. That afternoon, he finally revealed his truth. He walked up to her stand, no disguise, no pretense. "Lily," he said, his voice steadier than he felt, "I need to tell you something." She turned to him, eyes filled with curiosity, not an ounce of recognition. He took a deep breath. "My name is Henry. Henry Calloway." The moment he spoke his last name, the world seemed to pause. Lily blinked, confusion flickering across her face. "The billionaire?" she whispered, as if saying it out loud would make it more real. He braced himself for the usual reaction: shock, admiration, maybe even fear. But what he saw in Lily's eyes was something entirely different: hurt. "So, all this time you were lying?" she asked, her voice quiet, controlled, but laced with disappointment. "It wasn't a lie," he said quickly. He exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "I wanted to know if kindness was still real. If people could still care without expecting anything in return." Lily studied him for a long moment, then shook her head with a soft, bitter laugh. "You didn't need to test me, Henry. You just needed to believe." Silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken words. Henry had spent his life surrounded by people who only valued what he could give them. But Lily, she had given without hesitation, without expectation. He had thought he was the one testing her, but now he realized she had tested him too. And he wasn't sure if he had passed. "Let me make it right," he said. "Not with money, with something better." He reached into his pocket and handed her not a check, but a key. "This is for your coffee shop," he said. "Your dream. A place where people can feel the warmth you give so freely." Lily stared at the key in her palm, silent. It wasn't a handout. It was an opportunity, a chance to build something that was truly hers. Slowly, she looked up, tears brimming in her eyes. "You didn't have to do this," she whispered. Henry smiled, his own eyes softening. "I wanted to." And for the first time in his life, giving felt more fulfilling than earning. Days turned into weeks, and the coffee shop bloomed into existence, filled with the same warmth Lily had always carried. Henry found himself there every morning, watching as she greeted customers, laughing, making people feel at home. She wasn't just running a business. She was creating a place where kindness was currency. In the process, something even more unexpected happened. As Henry helped her build her dream, he realized he had found his own. Love had never been part of his plan, but with Lily, it wasn't something he needed to chase. It was in the quiet moments, the late-night talks, the way she made him feel seen. It was in the way she challenged him, reminded him that wealth meant nothing without purpose. And one evening, as they closed up the shop together, he turned to her, heart pounding. "Lily," he said softly, "I don't just want to be part of your dream. I want to be part of your life." Her smile was slow, but full of something Henry had craved for years, something real. "Then stay," she whispered. And in that moment, Henry knew he had finally found his home.